Welcome you all to my class on Sons and Lovers. This is the last class on Sons and Lovers. In my next class, I will start a new text. I will inform you that. And in the previous classes, what I discussed in the previous chapters, the uh, birth of Paul, and after that, he was growing up, and his relationship with Miriam and then Clara. And his relationship with Miriam was always challenged, and it was challenged because it was impeded. There was a kind of inhibition in Miriam, a kind of inhibition towards physical relationship. So Miriam was a kind of spiritual type of girl. On the other hand, Paul, being a boy, he was always expecting a sort of physical pleasures from Miriam, which he was denied, which he was deprived. Moreover, he had a kind of relationship with Clara as well, and it's going on. And so, what we understand that two girls are there. One is Miriam, the other is Clara. And in between these two girls, there is, Paul's mother, Mrs. Morel, Gertrude Morel. So, what is Mrs. Morel's role in Paul's life? Basically, when Paul is a lover, the role is that Paul is dominated by his mother, psychologically, obviously. He is so much dominated by his mother that whenever he goes to develop a kind of relationship with any girl, he is haunted by the memories, with his mother. And whenever he goes to develop relationship with any girl, he tries to find out or explore the qualities that he observes in his mother. So there rises the problem. Paul is always haunted by the memory, by the passions, by the emotions that he received from his mother. And that is why his relationship with Miriam, it did not go to any destination. And he tells his mother that he was going to break up with Miriam. We do not understand the reason basically, but we understand one thing, that Miriam could not fulfill the wishes, the desires of Paul. It can be from psychological point of view, it can be from physical point of view. But it is important that Miriam was unable to, not only satisfying Paul, but also she could not sustain her attraction. I mean, not her attraction, Paul's attraction towards her for a long time. And Paul always, not always, Paul sometimes expected a kind of advancement, I mean, physical advancement from Miriam, which Miriam didn't enjoy. On the other hand, Clara was that type of girl who had a kind of belief or trust on vitality, on physical pleasures, and these sort of things. So two opposite type of girls came to Paul's life. But what is important, that Paul was not satisfied with either type of girls. He was not satisfied with Miriam. There was something that worked in Paul's mind that refrained him from developing his relationship with Miriam. And there was again something in Paul's character which also, impeded his relationship with Clara, though Clara is a married girl. So Paul could not, or Paul was not successful as a lover, and this, failure can well be said to be the result of his excessive dependence on mother. That means mother fixation in his character. So this is the lesson. I mean, this is the chapter up to which we discussed in the previous classes, and we will start new chapter. And let's go to the new chapter. And he said to his mother that he was going to, break up with Miriam. And what did the mother say? The mother was not unhappy that much. And why she was not unhappy? Because probably something was working in her mind. What was working in her mind? Probably the mother was afraid of Miriam's character. Miriam was a spiritual type of girl, I have said. And that is why the mother thought that her son's soul might have been possessed by Miriam. So it was a kind of battle going on between Miriam and Mrs. Morel. And in between the battle, in between the conflict, stands Paul. So at one side, the mother stands, on the other side, Miriam stands. And both are willing to possess the soul of Paul. And Paul was, hesitating. Paul was helpless. And he was so much helpless that he could not maintain the balance between his mother and his lover. And that is why he had no alternative except eliminating one of his relationships. And since he could not give up his relationship with his mother, his fascination for his mother, that is why he decided to break up with, Miriam. So this is quite interesting. The battle is going on the psychological level, and I gave the ideas of Freud, the interpretation of Freud, and I also gave you some ideas about Oedipus complex in my previous classes. The Oedipus complex, I mean, mother fixation in the son's character, which was developed by Freud, and Freud said that son is always dominated by his feelings, towards his mother. That means the mother dominates the son. So this is known as Oedipus complex, and the connection between the son and the mother is very strong. And this strong connection, in most cases, destroys the relationship between the son and his wife or lover, whatever you say. So that is what Freud said. And this kind of Oedipus complex we also see in Paul's character, who cannot develop his relationship with Miriam. And remember another thing that I gave the reference of Shishir Kavita in my previous class as well, since it is my last class. That's why I again want to bring the comparison. In Shishir Kavita, there are two girls as well, and here we also see two girls. Here, Miriam and Clara. In Shishir Kavita, Lavanya and Ketuki. In Shishir Kavita, Lavanya represents, spiritual love, and Ketuki represents physical love. In this novel, Miriam represents spiritual love. On the other hand, Clara represents physical love. The question is, which kind of love is more important, and which kind of love is necessary for the existence or for the survival of human beings? If we go to the philosophy of love by John Donne, then we can say that both type of loves are important. And body is basically a kind of medium through which one soul connects with another. And that is the importance of the body. But the ultimate goal is spiritual connection. So love may start at the physical level, but ultimately what remains is the spiritual love. And the final destination is the spiritual love. So, but sometimes it so happens that the same person cannot possess both physical and spiritual flavor. So, if a person lacks in either spirituality or physical flavor, then the problem starts, and it's a very common problem for human beings, because it's very difficult for a single person to possess both spiritual and physical flavor in the character. Some people can. Obviously, there are some people who possess both. But if it doesn't, then what happens? So if a person cannot possess both kind of flavors, then the problem arises that we see in Shishir Kavita, that we see in Sons and Lovers. So what did Amit do finally in Shishir Kavita? Amit surrendered to physical love. Why? Why did Tagore do this? There are lots of criticism, there are lots of analysis, there are lots of interpretation. But my personal interpretation, and I have in my support some critics as well, is that probably Tagore also wanted to show that life as a whole, it, it can run or it should run. And if you want to let life run, then physical love has to be given a space in your life. And that is why the spiritual love between Amit and Lavanya, since it stands on the spiritual level, Tagore probably believed that this love will continue to exist even if there is no marriage, even if there is no physical connection. The love affair between Lavanya and Amit will continue to exist, though they are not married, though they will not be married. But the love affair between Amit and Ketuki will vanish unless there is a physical communion or there is a physical connection. So Tagore also maintained the existence of the survival of and the scope for both loves. And at one point, Amit also expressed his desire that he required both sorts of life. And when he was asked that you have to accept one because Ketuki is one person and Lavanya is another person, so you have to accept one. Amit was unwilling to accept one. He was willing to accept both. But since it is impractical, it is unrealistic, he had to marry one. So finally, he took the decision of marrying Ketoki and breaking up with Lavanya. But remember, Tagore, as I have already said, probably wanted to show that the love affair between Lavanya and Amit was not that type of love affair which could have vanished due to the physical, detachment. So the affair, the love affair, I mean the spiritual love affair between, Lavanya and Amit existed even though there was a marriage between Amit and Ketuki. But Amit and Ketuki's love affair probably would not exist unless there was a physical connection. So that is the philosophy probably developed by Tagore in Sheshe Kavita. But what we see in Sons and Lovers, whom will Paul accept? Will Paul accept Miriam, or will Paul accept Clara? The problem is even graver. The problem is even more difficult for Paul than it was for Omid. Because Paul cannot develop any spiritual connection, Paul cannot develop any physical connection, successful physical connection. That is why his problem is, as I am saying, is more, is stronger, is graver. And what we notice that Paul becomes unsuccessful, and as the novel, we are towards the end of the novel, Paul is not going to be a successful lover. He can neither develop his spiritual connection nor can he develop his physical connection permanently. Now, chapter 12 starts with the title of chapter 12 is Passion. Paul begins to spend much time with his mother again since he has decided to break up with Miriam. They go to the Isle of Wight for a holiday, and Mrs. Morel has a bad fainting fit caused by too much walking. She recovers, but Paul still feels anxious about her condition. So instead of Miriam, now Paul spends his time with his mother. So look at the battle between mother and the lover. So the mother expects that her son will stay with her. The lover expects that Paul will stay with her. So it's a very difficult relationship. It's a very complex relationship to handle with. And it's a universal problem. It's not a problem for Paul alone. So the mother becomes sick after too much walking. They move together. They travel together. I mean, Paul and his mother, they are traveling together. But this traveling was supposed to be, enjoyed by Paul and Miriam. But instead of spending time with Miriam, Paul is spending time with his mother. Paul also returns to spending a great deal of time with Clara, and now Paul sometimes goes to Clara, being fascinated by physical love. He tells her that he has broken off with Miriam, and he tells Clara that he has broken up with Miriam. One Saturday evening, Paul and Clara go for a walk and he kisses her. Then, upon leaving, he is suddenly consumed by passion for her and cannot wait for Monday to come so that he can see her again. Now, you can easily understand that he is fascinated by Clara's beauty and he is fascinated physically towards Clara. And he kisses Clara, and he was trying to enjoy physical love with Clara. and he could not wait even for the Monday to come. So on Monday, they go walking in the afternoon and take a tram out to the country. They walk near a river and decide to go down to the bank. But because of the rain, the path is gone. They encounter two fishermen while walking along the river bank and keep walking until they find a secluded clearing slightly above the river level. After they leave, they climb up to the top again and they stop while Paul cleans up Clara's boots. She distracts him with kisses, but he finally finishes. They stop for tea at the house of an old woman who gives Clara some flowers. Now you see how Paul and Clara are spending their time. They're going to the river, they're going to the mountain, they're going to different places to the ice. And this is how Paul is enjoying his time with Clara. And this is a kind of vitality that we see in Paul's character, in Clara's character. I told you at the very beginning that D.H. Lawrence is a man, was a novelist who preferred vitality in life. So what Miriam lacked in her character was probably vitality. So vitality is also very important in a person's character. If you read Lady Chatterley's Lover, which was banned for a long time for offering some obscene narration in the novel, still you will find the philosophy of D.H. Lawrence in that novel as well. That Lawrence always loves vitality in a person's character. He does not like dead persons. He does not like people who don't have blood in their veins. He likes people who have blood in their veins. So we see that Paul and Clara, they're spending time, they're enjoying their time in the hills, in the rivers, and in different places. And finally, they go to the house of an old woman who gives Clara some flowers. So these flowers are symbolic of physical love. So their movement in the mountain is symbolic of physical love. Their movement in the river is symbolic of physical love as well as vitality, and they are full of life now. Paul returns home and tells his mother that he has been with Clara. She cautions him because Clara is a married woman, and he tells her not to worry. He asks if she would like to meet Clara and decides to invite her to tea at their house one Sunday afternoon. Now, Paul returns home, and you know that you can notice one thing, that Paul is that type of boy that who, after spending time with Clara in that manner, after returning home, he doesn't hesitate to tell all these things to his mother. And whenever he spends time with Miriam, he tells everything to his mother. Whenever he spends time with Clara, he tells everything to his mother. Now, the problem is that will the lovers like it? That whether the lovers will like it. If the boy frequently goes home, obviously the boy will go home, but after reaching home, he will share everything with the mother. Then the girls will hesitate to share feelings with the lover. So this is the complex from which Paul is suffering from. Whatever or whichever relationship he develops with any girl, he is going to share everything with his mother. Why he is doing that? Because he is so much, dominated by his mother psychologically that he cannot stop refraining from telling the details what happens to his mother. He still sees Miriam occasionally, but he does not stop meeting, Miriam. He still maintains his relationship with Miriam. Why? Because there is a kind of, spirituality even in Paul, which, takes him subconsciously to Miriam's house. And they talk about Clara and why she left her husband. And he discusses with Miriam that why did Clara leave her husband. Miriam tries to compare them to Mr. and Mrs. Morel, but Paul disagrees. He says that his mother felt passionately toward his father, and that's why she stayed with him. And when Paul asked Clara that why there is a kind of misunderstanding between Clara and her husband Baxter Dawes, so Miriam says that their relationship is like the relationship of Paul's parents, but Paul disagrees. because he has observed one thing in Clara, that Clara does not have that much feelings for Baxter Dawes, but his mother, I mean Paul's mother, has strong feelings towards Paul's father. So that is the kind of difference he observes, between his mother and Clara. So again, you notice that whenever any girl comes, or the discussion regarding any girl comes, he is again and again going to compare them with his mother. He feels that Clara never had this type of passion for Baxter, and he again says that my mother, that means Paul's mother, has got strong feelings towards Paul's father. Paul claims so, but Clara doesn't have that much, feeling, passion for Baxter Dawes. Miriam understands that he is trying to initiate himself into passion. He tells her that Clara is coming to tea at his house on Sunday to meet his mother, and she understands that this is an indication of his seriousness. Now, he tells her, Paul tells Miriam that Clara is coming to his house next Sunday to see his mother, and now Miriam understands that what does this sort of visit indicate. So she understands that there is a kind of, physical closeness developing between Paul and Clara. When Clara comes to tea next Sunday, she gets along with his mother. Morel also meets her and impresses her with his politeness. Clara and Paul are in the garden looking at the flowers when Miriam arrives to say hello to Clara. Now, Clara came to Paul's house. Clara and Paul were spending time. By this time, Miriam also arrives in Paul's house. So, two girls and Paul. She sees them together and feels as though they are married. Mrs. Morel is not pleased to see Miriam. So, when Miriam comes, Miriam observes Paul and Clara in such a situation that seemed to Miriam that as if Paul and Clara were married. So you can gaze the kind of closeness Paul and Clara were enjoying. Mrs. Morel did not like the arrival of Miriam, whom she still dislikes. Now, try to understand one thing. Miriam is unmarried. Miriam is a girl. On the other hand, Clara is a married girl. So, as a mother, Mrs. Morel should have inspired her son Paul to develop relationship with Miriam instead of Clara, because Clara was a married girl. But quite significantly, and quite, it's our astonishment. We are astonished to see that Mrs. Morel dislikes, or Mrs. Morel's dislikings towards Miriam is probably stronger than her dislikings towards Clara. This is very significant, and why I told you personally that Miriam was that sort of girl who wanted to possess the soul of Paul. On the other hand, Clara was that kind of girl who was rather interested in physical enjoyment and the external beauty of life, not the internal beauty of life. So the mother was more worried about the possessiveness of Miriam. Miriam was a possessive kind of a girl. What does possessive mean? I discussed it in the previous class. Possessive means that I possess you. That means you are mine. It's a very dangerous statement that you are mine. You are an individual. So you cannot be mine. When I will say that I possess someone, it seems that that's a kind of property. A man, a human being cannot be property. I am again, giving reference from Sheshe Kavita, that there is a kind of, difference between Ketoki and Lavanya. And Lavanya is a kind of, priceless entity. So Miriam as a girl can be a priceless entity. But the problem, the mother observes that Miriam has got possessiveness in her character. and she will possess her son, and Mrs. Morel is afraid that she will lose her control over her son. And if the son's soul is completely possessed by another girl, then she feels threatened. All three go to chapel, and afterward, when Paul and Clara are walking home, she asks him if he will give Miriam up. He tells her that he thinks he will always be friends with Miriam, and she draws from him slightly and mocks him, telling him to run after Miriam. So when Clara and Paul were returning from the chapel after the visit, Clara asked Paul that whether Paul would break up with Miriam. Paul said that probably he was going to do so, but Clara mocked and made jokes with Paul and asked Paul to develop his relationship with Miriam. He gets angry with her and kisses her in rage. So again, Paul becomes very angry and he kisses Clara, not Miriam. Miriam is not now present. And he kisses Clara again. He becomes very angry because Clara told him to develop relationship with Miriam. They go off into the field where they look at the lights of the town until Clara realizes that she must go to make her train. They run and she just makes the train. So they were spending their time in the field, and they were spending their time, with closeness, and they were, almost lost in their places. And finally, Clara realized that if she did not start, then she was going to miss the train. The next week, Paul takes Clara to the theater so that the depth of relationship which is developing between Clara and Paul. So next week, they go to the theater. She tells him to wear his evening suit, and she arrives dressed in a green evening dress. So Clara tells Paul to wear a evening suit, and she also arrives dressed in a green evening dress. After the play, Paul realizes that he has missed his train, and Clara tells him to come home with her instead of walking. So, when they finished the theater, the drama, Paul realized that the last train for home was already gone, and he had no alternative than staying in Clara's house. So Clara invited him to stay in her house. They arrive, and Clara's mother, Mrs. Radford, makes fun of their fancy clothes. And when they returned home, Clara's mother made fun of their clothes, the kind of dresses they were wearing. Paul and Clara sit up playing cribbage, and Mrs. Radford waits up for them. So Clara and Paul were playing, and Mrs. Radford waits for them. Finally, Paul goes to bed. This is very important. Paul goes to bed, but he cannot sleep for want of Clara. But Paul misses Clara when he goes to bed. He was expecting Clara in his bed. So it indicates his physical desire towards Clara. After he hears Mrs. Radford go to sleep and realizes that Clara is waiting downstairs, he goes down to her and asks her to come to his bed instead of going to sleep with her mother. She refuses and he goes back to bed. So Clara was waiting in the downstairs, so Paul could not sleep, and he went to the downstairs and proposed Clara to spend the night with him, but Clara refused, and Paul went back to bed. Chapter 13. So you understand that Paul was denied, denied or deprived, not deprived, denied by Clara to stay together. Chapter 13. Baxter Dawes, Clara's husband. Paul is in a bar with some friends when Baxter Dawes enters, Clara's husband from whom she has been separated for years. So Baxter Dawes is Clara's husband, and Clara is separated from Baxter Dawes for several years. Paul offers him a drink since he is the superior at Jordan's, but Dawes refuses. But Paul offers drink to Baxter Dawes, but Baxter Dawes refuses. Dawes begins to talk about Paul being at the theater with a turd, and Paul is about to leave when Dawes says something that causes Paul to throw a glass of beer in his face. So Baxter Dawes was angry because Paul was mixing with his ex-wife Clara. So, he used some slang and some insulting words, at which Paul threw a glass of beer at him. Dawes rushes at Paul but is held back. So Baxter Dawes also rushed towards Paul for fighting, but somehow he was refrained by others and is thrown out of the bar. And Baxter Dawes was thrown out at the bar. Paul's friends at the bar tell him that he should learn to box so that he can take care of Dawes. When he leaves, one of the men walks with him. So, uh, some of his friends in the bar had told Paul to learn boxing so that he could handle Baxter Dawes. So, you know that the battle between Paul and Baxter Dawes was regarding the relationship that Paul developed with Clara. When he leaves, one of the men walks with him. So when he left the bar, one of the men, walked with Paul. He tells Clara what has happened, and she does not seem surprised, saying that Baxter is a low sort of person. She wants Paul to carry a gun or a knife for protection and is angry when he refuses. And Clara, gives a kind of suggestion to Paul to carry a knife or a gun because Baxter is not a good fellow. But Paul says, no, I am not going to do that. But Clara is to some extent, angry because Paul doesn't have clear idea about Baxter Dawes. One day at the factory, Paul runs into Dawes. Dawes threatens him while he carries on with his work. Finally, Dawes grabs Paul's arms and Thomas Jordan comes out of his office to see what is happening. He tells Dawes to leave, and when he does not, he grabs his arm. So Dawes jerks his elbow and sends Jordan flying backward through a spring door and down half a flight of steps. Jordan is not hurt, but he dismisses Dawes. So it happened so one day that there was a kind of conflict between Paul and Baxter Dawes. At this, Jordan, the owner of the factory, he came forward, and Baxter Dawes started fighting with the owner. So as you know it very well that if a person starts fighting with the owner of an office or of an organization, then you are going to lose your job. That is exactly what happened to Baxter Dawes. He lost his job. Paul discusses love with his mother and says that perhaps something is the matter with him that he cannot love. This is again very significant. Paul goes to his mother and tells his mother that, Mother, there is something in me which cannot allow me to develop my love with any girl. She says that he has not met the right woman, and he replies that he will never meet the right woman while she is alive. Very, very significant. The mother says that, my son, probably you have not got the right woman so far. That's why you are uh, you cannot develop your love affair. But Paul says that, Mother, probably I am not going to fall in love or I am not going to find any lover as long as you are alive. Because your existence is, is standing as an impediment, as an obstacle for my love affair with any girl. Clara asks him about the future, and he tells her that he will go abroad and then come back to be with his mother. So when Clara asks Paul that, what have you thought about your future? Paul says, he says that he will go abroad and then he will return again and he will stay with his mother. So in Paul's life so far, in Paul's mind so far, he has not been able to give space to any girl. His mentality, his mind, his soul, everything is possessed by his mother. He tells her not to ask about the future but just to be with him now. And Paul becomes irritated and asks Clara not to question about the future and just uh, ask about the present. and they surrender to their passion. She does not, and now they again make love. Both Paul and Clara, they make love. They surrender to their passion. It indicates that. She does not want a divorce from Baxter and therefore cannot belong to him completely. But the problem is, they are making physical love. I mean, Paul and Clara, they are making physical love. But Clara does not want a divorce from Baxter. So unless a girl gets the divorce paper, she cannot marry another man. But Clara does not want divorce from Baxter. They both realize that they will go separate ways. But now, since Clara does not want divorce from Baxter Dawes, there is no possibility of Clara's marriage with Paul. So both of them, both Paul and Clara, realize that they are enjoying physical love, but permanent relationship or marriage is not possible because officially Clara is not divorced. One evening they passed doors as they are walking. One evening Clara and Paul were passing, Baxter Dawes. Baxter Dawes was also walking. They passed Baxter Dawes. And Paul does not realize who it is until after they have passed him. And Clara says it was Baxter. Another night, sometime later, Paul is walking alone and encounters Dawes waiting for him. So Baxter is, uh, observing the movement of Paul. And at one night, Baxter was waiting for Paul. And naturally, a fighting started. And Paul was hard in that fight. He struggles to get himself home and goes to sleep. And his mother is there to take care of him when he awakes. And Paul became ill to some extent after the fight, and he was taken care of by his mother. While he is ill, Clara and then Miriam come to visit him, and he tells his mother that he does not care about them. So when Paul was ill, both Miriam and Clara, separately obviously, they came to visit Paul. But Paul tells his mother that, Mother, I don't care whether Clara comes or Miriam comes because I love neither of them. I love you only. After he is better, he goes on a holiday with his friend Newton and arranges to meet his mother at Annie's house in Sheffield. When he arrives there, Annie opens the door and he realizes that his mother is ill. They discover that she has a tumor and Paul goes to see her doctor in Nottingham. Now, by this time, another development takes place. Paul's mother, that means Gertrude Morel or Mrs. Morel, becomes sick. And when goes to the doctor, you know, in Nottingham, they realize that, the mother is suffering from, not tumor, there is a tumor uh, developed in her body. He agrees to come to Sheffield, looks at the tumor and says that he may be able to cure it. Mrs. Morel stays in Sheffield for 2 months and then the family hires a motor car to drive her home, at which she is very glad. So finally Mrs. Morel is, going home. So what happens? Let's see. Mrs. Morel has developed a tumor in her body. Dr. Ansell tells Paul that Baxter Dawes is in the fever hospital in Sheffield and Paul decides to visit him. So in the same hospital, Baxter Dawes is also there. Paul goes to visit Dawes. Dawes is the husband of Clara. That he can recommend him a convalescent home in Sithop. He tells Clara that he has been to visit Dawes in the hospital. And Paul again tells Clara that Paul visited Baxter Dawes in the hospital. And she becomes upset and realizes that she has treated her husband badly. And now a kind of realization develops in Clara. And the realization is that Clara thinks that she has badly treated her husband. So she could have been more sympathetic to Baxter Dawes. And she goes to see him to try to make amends, but at first they do not get on well. And now Clara goes to the hospital again to visit Baxter Dawes, and Baxter Dawes doesn't behave well. Paul also visits Dawes a few times, and the two men begin to develop a sort of friendship. Now, Paul also makes frequent visits to Baxter Dawes in the hospital, and a kind of friendship develops. This is surprising but true. A kind of friendship develops between Paul and Baxter Dawes, I mean Clara's husband. And a realization is also there in Clara's mind that she has not treated well with her husband. Paul does not spend much time with Clara now because he is occupied with his mother's illness. So Paul cannot give time to Clara because Paul has to give time to his mother because his mother is ill. Mrs. Morel gets gradually worse and Paul spends much time caring for her. Mrs. Morel's condition deteriorates and Paul has to spend more time to his mother. When Clara reminds him that it is her birthday, he takes her to the seashore but spends most of the time talking about his mother and how he wishes that she would die. And it is Clara's birthday. Clara tells Paul that it's her birthday. Paul tells Clara to the seashore. They spend time, but this is not the Paul whom Clara knew earlier. Paul is now completely occupied by her thoughts about his sick mother, and all the time he talked about his mother. So you can easily understand that how much he is dominated by his mother. And Paul says that he cannot tolerate the kind of pains his mother is suffering from. So he also expects that his mother dies because she was suffering very much. She was suffering too much. The next time he sees Dawes, Paul mentions that he has been with Clara, and this is the first mention the two men make of Clara. He tells Dawes that he will go abroad after his mother dies. And again, Paul visits Dawes and tells him that, he visited Clara. And this is the first time they talk about Clara. Dawes is the husband of Clara, and Paul, is the lover of Clara. And a friendship develops between these two persons. And he tells Dawes that basically he wants to inform Baxter Dawes that he is not going to marry Clara, or he is not going to make his relationship with Clara permanent, and he is going abroad when his mother will die. Time passes and Mrs. Morel stays the same. The condition of Mrs. Morel does not improve. Miriam writes to Paul and he visits her. Miriam also writes letters to Paul, and Paul also sometimes visits Miriam. She kisses him, believing he will be comforted. Miriam, you can remember, Miriam knew that Paul expected a kind of physical advancement. So, in order to give a kind of satisfaction to Paul, she kissed Paul, but he does not want that kind of comfort from her and finally manages to get away. But Paul does not enjoy the kisses of Miriam anymore. Paul and Annie, brother and sister, shared the nursing of their mother. They both nurse their mother. They begin to feel as if they can no longer go on, and they become upset because their mother's condition is gradually deteriorating. And Paul decides to give her an overdose of morphia to put an end to all their suffering. He crushes all the pills. Morphia is, a kind of strong sleeping pill, and he discusses with his sister that they cannot, you know, uh, see the pains of their mothers. They cannot tolerate the pains of their mothers. So they decide to give overdose of the sleeping pill and thus complete the or thus make their mother pass this world. He crushes all the pills and don't think that they are killing their mother. They are thinking that they are going to sacrifice their mother because their mother was suffering so much. She was suffering so much pain that since Paul loved his mother so much, he could not tolerate, he could not endure the pains that his mother was suffering. So he crushed the pills together and gave it to the drinks of his mother, milk, milk, poured the sleeping pill into the milk, and she drinks it obediently, and the mother drinks the milk obediently, believing it to be a new sleeping draught. and the mother thought that it was new kind of sleeping draught or pill. She lasts through the night and finally dies the next morning. So because of the influence of the excessive sleeping pill, the mother dies. So Paul, you know, indirectly or directly, he was the reason for the death of Mrs. Morel. But remember one thing, that don't think that because of money or because of selfishness, Paul gave the extra dose of sleeping pill, but because of his extreme love towards his mother, he sacrificed his mother by giving overdose of the sleeping pill. Dawes is now in the convalescent home and Paul goes to see him again and suggests that he has plenty of life and left in him and that he should try to get Clara back so that he can regain something of his former life. The next day he and Clara bring Dawes to his lodging and Paul leaves them together. So, mother dies, Paul's mother dies, and now Paul brings Clara to Baxter Dawes and he also makes the union a reunion rather between Clara and her husband Baxter Dawes, and we see that Clara and Baxter Dawes they come close together again and they decide to stay together. So it's also an important development and it's also very important for Clara and Baxter Dawes' life. So Clara is now gone from Paul's life. The mother dies. Clara again goes to Baxter Dawes. So only one girl is left, Miriam. So what will happen to her? The last chapter. Derelict means abandoned or deserted or alienated or lonely. So abandoned is the better word. That a person who is deserted, who has been thrown alone. Clara goes back to Sheffield with her husband. So Clara now stays with her husband Baxter Dawes, and Paul is left alone with his um, father. There is no point to in keeping their house any longer. So what's the use of keeping the house, because mother is gone. So only the father and the son, and Paul works in a different place. So they each take lodgings nearby. So the uh, concept of house also vanishes. They give up the house and they desert the house and they start staying in lodgings, a kind of, you can say, a hostel life or hotel life, you can also say. Paul is mess life, better word, phrase. Paul is lost without his mother. So Paul is now completely lost. He has nobody in the world. And basically he is lost because of the death of his mother. He can no longer paint. His mother was the source of inspiration for his painting. That you need someone in this world as a fountain, as a source, as a fountain. So he cannot paint. He puts all his energy into his work at the factory. So whatever he does in the factory, in his job. He has debates within himself, and there is a kind of debate in his own self, telling himself that he must stay alive for his mother's sake. However, he wants to give up. Sometimes he thinks that he has to survive in this world because his mother expected him to be a successful man. So for his mother's sake, he has to survive. On the other hand, he sometimes thinks that he has to resign, he has to give up because he is completely lost. One Sunday evening, however, he sees Miriam at the Unitarian church. He asks her to have supper with him quickly, and she agrees. So, at one incident, he meets Miriam in the church, and he asks Miriam to go with him and take the supper. Miriam agrees. She tells him that she has been going to farming college and will probably be kept on as a teacher there. And Miriam informs Paul that she is going to the farming college and she also expects that she is going to be a teacher over there. She says that she thinks they should be married. So look at the proposal of Miriam. this is the last chapter, and the novel is going to end. And Miriam proposes Paul to marry her, and she proposes that they should get married. And he says that he is not sure that could be a much good. And what is Paul's reply? Paul says that I don't think that marriage between you and me is going to be a good one. He says he does not want it very much, and so she gives up. And he says, Paul says, that I am not expecting any marriage. I am not thinking about any marriage. And now, being frustrated, Miriam gives up. That is the end between them. She leaves him, realizing that his soul could not leave her wherever she was. Now, this is again very interesting. She leaves him, realizing that his soul could not leave her wherever she was. Miriam leaves Paul, and this statement has double meaning. This double meaning means, what does this she mean? What does this her mean? This she or her can indicate to Paul's mother. So Miriam thinks that Paul's soul will not be able to give up his thoughts about his mother, wherever the mother was, whether she was in this world or she was in the world beyond. This can be one interpretation. And the other interpretation, that Paul would not be able to forget Miriam. So this is optimistic interpretation of the statement. And the previous one is the pessimistic interpretation of the statement. Now, which one is right? We don't know, because you will see the ending of the novel. How does the novel end? The novel ends in both tones. There is the possibility of pessimism, there is the possibility of optimism. So this statement can be a reference, can be, uh, you know, directed towards Paul's feelings towards Mrs. Morel or his mother. That wherever the mother is, whether she was alive or dead, Paul was that kind of boy who would always be possessed by his mother. Or wherever Miriam is, from optimistic point of view, if we interpret this statement, Miriam thinks that wherever Miriam is, Paul would not be able to forget Miriam. So this is optimistic interpretation. We don't know which one is right, because D.H. Lawrence also doesn't want us to give straightforward answer. Paul alone yearns for his mother and considers following her into death. So what does Paul say? Paul yearns for his mother. He is still lamenting for his mother. He is completely helpless because of the absence of his mother, and considers that he has to follow her into death. He wants to die. He wants to commit suicide. However, he decides to leave off thinking about suicide. And finally, he stops thinking about suicide and instead walks toward the town. And he stops thinking about suicide, and now he is walking towards the town. So, this last phrase, this last sentence, that giving up the thought about suicide and walking towards the town, I personally feel is giving an optimistic note that he is going to start a new life. His journey towards the town is his acceptance of reality. His journey towards the town is his acceptance of vitality of life. His journey towards the town is his surrender to the optimistic bent of mind that a person possesses. And his journey towards the town gives us the minimum possibility of meeting Miriam again. We are not sure, I am not sure, because D.H. Lawrence didn't make it clear, but the possibility is there since he is walking towards town. So this is how the novel ends. And how you will interpret the finishing of the novel, I have discussed it from both point of views. That if you look at the last sentence, it probably gives an idea or hint about the optimism of desperate optimism of Paul's life. So this novel, finally, I would like to share with you. This novel is to some extent autobiographical because there are many elements regarding the mining, regarding the profession, regarding the areas, regarding the family structure, which have got some similarity with D.H. Lawrence's life. So this is to some extent autobiographical novel. At the same time, I have explained it repeatedly, the Oedipus complex in Paul's character, that he was completely dominated by his emotions towards his mother. And even in the final chapter, even towards the end of the novel, he was trying to commit suicide because he was willing to go to the world where his mother went. Though Miriam is there, though Miriam proposed marriage, still Miriam's proposal of marriage could not convince Paul. He was so much haunted by his mother's memory. He was so much possessed by his mother's memory. It may appear to be a kind of excessive passion in Paul's character. Readers may think that this is too much for a boy. Readers may think that this is not practical. They may ask the question that have we ever seen a character like Paul which so much dominated by mother fixation? You know, sometimes when a writer wants to develop a theory, when a writer wants to develop something universal, there is always the possibility of exaggeration. Unless this exaggeration was there, unless this sort of excessiveness was there in the character of Paul, you would not also understand the kind of problem a man faces between maintaining his relationship with his mother and wife or mother and beloved. So, in order to establish this universal complex relationship, you may accept the improbable feelings existing in Paul. So Paul's character, there may be some excessive passions in Paul's characters towards his mother, but these excessive passions make the readers understand the complex relationship that D.H. Lawrence has wanted to explore in this novel. So thank you very much. In our next class, we are going to start a new text. Thank you.